What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be testing out some of the underbarrel attachments in Battlefield 2042, namely just the different types of grips and sort of just trying to figure out what exactly they do, because there are certain attachments that say they do one thing and they seem to do the complete opposite. And so we're just going to kind of test that out and see which ones actually do what and which ones are the best for you guys to use. Before we get into it, if you guys are new to the channel, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. There's going to be plenty more videos like this on the channel in the coming weeks and months. But with that being said, let's get stuck right into it. So in this video, I decided to test the AK-24 as well as actually a bunch of other weapons as well from different classes. Now in the video, I'm only going to be showing the AK-24 simply because pretty much all of the results were the same regardless of which weapon I was using. I did want to test them to just sort of make sure that they weren't, affecting weapons differently depending on the class, but they did tend to all be essentially the same results. So rather than wasting your guys' time with like a 25-minute video testing every single class, I thought I would just show you guys the AK-24 since that's the one that had the most attachments in the test that I did. And so just know that these results are essentially across the board from any weapon in the game. On top of that, also keep in mind that I'm only testing with the factory barrel and the factory ammo, and the sight doesn't actually affect any stats, so it doesn't really matter what sight I'm using to test this. Now if you change the barrel and you change the ammo type, then obviously these results are going to differ quite a bit, and there's just so many different variables there. I was actually going to test a bunch of different stuff, but again, the video would just end up being far too long. So I'm only testing with the factory barrel and the factory ammo, but just keep in mind that, if you add a silencer and, the high power rounds, then obviously that's going to change the recoil pattern. So keep that in mind, but obviously all of this is just tested with the factory AK-24. Now we're going to go through two different tests with each different attachment. One of those will be static and one will be moving. The reason for that is because a lot of these attachments will actually sort of say that they reduce the recoil when you're moving, but then increase the recoil when you're static, or they'll be the other way around and they'll just reduce the recoil when you're static at the cost of more recoil while you're moving. So I thought I would test both static and moving just to get a better idea of which ones are best for which situation. On top of that, I'm also going to be testing using these lines on the road here just to make sure that I'm at the exact same distance with each test. But with all of that little bit of context and information out of the way, let's get stuck into the actual tests. So starting off with the AK, we're going to start with the Rattlesnake Light Grip. Now this one is meant to be essentially for when you're moving, so it reduces your recoil while you're moving, but it's meant to actually increase your recoil while you're standing still. And the first test here is actually a standstill. As you can see, it seems to be pretty straight up in the air. There doesn't seem to be any horizontal recoil there at all. And so next we're going to move on to the Cobra Grip. This one is the complete opposite. This is meant to be actually for your static recoil, and as you can see there, it actually seems to be tighter, but it actually recoils a bit higher and it ends up going over the top of the cement there. So weirdly enough, the one that is meant to sort of increase your accuracy while you're static, it actually seems to recoil higher, but in saying that, it is definitely also tighter. Now next up we have the LWG Grip, and this one is meant to do essentially the exact same thing as the Cobra Grip. So this is kind of why it's a little bit confusing, because there are multiple that say they do essentially the exact same thing. As you can see, the recoil pattern there is actually pretty similar to that previous grip, and it actually does also go over the cement again. So it seems the ones that actually reduce your recoil while you're static, they tend to actually make it recoil further up into the sky. So it is a little bit confusing, and that is exactly why I wanted to test these attachments in this video. Now next up, I'm actually testing this with no grip at all. This is just the factory underbarrel here, and again this is another static test, and as you can see, that doesn't seem to be pretty much any different from any of those other tests. The recoil seems to be fairly tight there. There's no real horizontal recoil, and then the vertical recoil, it actually tends to be a little bit less than those previous two grips, which are meant to reduce your recoil at a standstill. So once again, this is kind of just adding to the confusion a little bit. Now the last static test that we have here is the BCG Light Grip, which is again meant to be pretty similar to the Rattlesnake, where it's essentially meant to increase your recoil when you're standing still, but actually improve your recoil while you're moving. But again, as you can see, it does tend to actually reduce that vertical recoil when I'm standing still. So this is all making not too much sense for me personally. None of them are really drastically different from the rest of them. And in saying that, the ones that are meant to actually be, more accurate while you're standing still, they seem to be the ones that are actually less accurate. So we're going to move on to the moving tests here. And in these tests, rather than moving side to side, because that is a little bit hard to sort of gauge the same distance with each test, I'm essentially starting on the exact same line, and then I'm actually just moving straight forward towards the target while shooting as well. So we're going to go through those exact same grips in the exact same order. starting out with the Rattlesnake, which is again meant to be reducing your recoil while you're moving. Now, as you can see, because I'm moving forward, the recoil pattern is actually drastically lower than the other tests. That is just because I'm simply closer to the target. So it seems like it drastically improves your recoil, but that is simply because I'm closer to the wall when I'm actually finished firing. But as you can see with the Rattlesnake, that does tend to be pretty much just a vertical recoil pattern there, and it does tend to be pretty tight as well. Next up, we once again have the Cobra grip, and keep in mind this one is obviously meant to be used when static. And as you can see, it is pretty similar to the Rattlesnake, but it is definitely less tight. It sort of has a little bit more horizontal recoil there, as you can see. Next up, we have the LWG grip, which again is meant to be used when static. And as you can see, this one actually has quite a bit of horizontal recoil. This is easily the biggest deviation from any of the other tests. And so at least when you're moving, I would completely rule out the LWG grip pretty much just from that test alone. Next up, we have the moving test with just the no grip whatsoever. This is just the factory underbarrel. Surprisingly, this seems to be essentially the exact same recoil pattern as the Rattlesnake, which is obviously meant to be used when you're moving. So the fact that no grip whatsoever essentially works just as good as the one that is meant to improve it when you're moving, this is exactly why I wanted to test this out in a video. Now, lastly, we have the BCG light grip, and as you can see, this one is absolutely terrible. This is actually meant to be used when you're moving, so this is essentially meant to be the same as the Rattlesnake, which is the one on the far left there. And as you can see, it is absolutely terrible. I would literally never use this grip after testing this. Literally, you are better off to not use any underbarrel attachment at all. And even the ones that are meant to be used when you're static actually tend to be a little bit better when you are moving than the BCG light grip, which again is meant to be used when moving. So completely rule that one out. That is an absolutely terrible grip to use. And as you can see there on the left-hand side tests, which were the static tests, it doesn't seem to do any better in the static test either. So I guess what we can gather from this test is that the Rattlesnake seems to be the best all round. You can see on the left there that it does seem to stay pretty tight, and it is essentially just vertical recoil when it's static, and then when it's moving, that does to me look like the best recoil pattern. It's fairly tight with obviously very little vertical recoil. I would say overall the LWG grip seems to be the best. That is the one in the middle there on the left, and that one is meant to be used when static. So I would actually say to essentially drop the Cobra grip and instead use the LWG grip. And then, like I said, for when you're moving around, I would just recommend to use the Rattlesnake. That seems to be the best all round, but also the best when it comes to moving. So that is pretty much it for all of the testing, and like I said, I did end up testing the SMGs and I think the LMGs as well, and the grips that I used in this video, they were all essentially the same results on those weapons. For the SMGs, they don't have quite as many. I think they only have 3 underbarrel grips, but they are named the same thing, and those ones essentially worked in the same way that they did in these tests. So rest assured that essentially everything you can see in this test does seem to be the same for pretty much every other weapon in the game. As I'm sure you can gather from those tests, the descriptions in the actual in the plus system when you're making your loadout, they seem to be completely inaccurate in some cases. This seems to be a common occurrence in many shooters out there. It seems like the attachments barely ever do what they actually say they do. I know in Warzone and just Call of Duty in general, you can actually never tell which attachments are the best, because the ones that say they do one thing that sounds good to you, they for some reason tend to do the complete opposite. So it's very much the same here. The ones that I personally thought were going to be the best were actually not that great at all. With that being said, the Rattlesnake is essentially the only one that I've been using, and that does seem to be the all-round best. So at least we know now which is probably going to be the best, which is going to be the Rattlesnake. It seems to work well in every situation. But yeah, as for the other grips, there was definitely some weird results there that, to be honest, I was probably expecting, because just from playing, you can kind of tell that certain grips don't seem to do what they say they do. But I'm glad that I tested this out, because now at least we have a little bit of confirmation. Now, the fact that these aren't working the way that they are essentially intended to, this could just be a bug. So if we do ever get any updates to stuff like this, then I'll be sure to sort of update these tests. So you'll definitely hear about it here on the channel if these do end up changing. But for now, this does seem to be how the grips are working. That is going to do it for this one though, guys. If there's any other stuff like this that you guys want me to test, then definitely let me know down in the comments. This time next week, I'm actually going to be uploading essentially the same video, but for the barrel attachments. I'm going to just go over exactly what they all do, how they change the weapon, just so that you guys can get a better understanding of those attachments, because they are all a little bit confusing, to be honest. And much like these tests, I'm fairly sure that they won't actually work as they say they do. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And like I said, if you guys do have any other stuff that you want me to test, then definitely let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below. And if you guys are new to the channel, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. There's going to be plenty more content like this on the way in 2022, so make sure you don't miss out. If you want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then do consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.